In because we have a lot to cover. So welcome again, everybody, to our very first monthly meeting. As many of you may know, I'm Ivy Cook with Soka Gakkai International. I am the new co-chair, and together with Pamela Morgan of Zonta International. And I will pass it on to her for her welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Along with my co-chair, Ivy, I'm so pleased to welcome you to the first NGO CSW New York meeting of 2023-2024, and am particularly excited about today's program on peace for gender equality. UN documentation indicates that peace means dignity, well-being for all, not just the absence of war. Vision of Humanity is quoted as saying that peace is the solution to poverty and hunger. As we listen to today's speakers, let's bear these statements in mind as we tie today's program to the lives of the most vulnerable, women and girls, and to CSW 68. Ivy will now introduce our new focus.
Yeah, so Pamela and I started July 1st, and we've been very busy at work together with our past chair, Hudi, and also the new executive committee. We have a couple new members. I'm not sure if everybody is on the call. Sorry, I can't see everybody in the audience, but if you want to wave your hand or something, executive committee members, would love to. I'm sure everybody would like to see who you are. And if not, I'm sorry again, because I can't see my whole screen. But we met actually twice over the summer, in June and in August for our retreats. And one of the outcomes from that retreat was our strategic plan. We decided we do want a strategic plan. And the four major goals that we came up with was to strengthen NGO CSW's capacity and structure. The second is on advocacy and accountability at CSW and beyond. Expanding our partnerships is the third one, and strengthening and increasing youth participation in NGO CSW New York. So I'll pass it to Pamela about our working groups.
Thank you, Ivy. NGO CSW is expanding our methods of work, and we have formed 4 working groups to guide our process, 2 of which are open to NGO CSW membership for participation, and 2 are internal to assist the executive committee. UN Engagement Working Group and the Operations Manual Working Group are internal to the executive committee. The Peace for Gender Equality Working Group, which, by the way, is responsible for today's program, and the Social Justice Working Group are open for participation by members of NGO CSW New York. And a link for the application form to join either of those 2 working groups is in the chat for members of the committee. I also want to point out that the 68th session of the Commission on the Status of Women will take place from the 11th to the 22nd of March 2024, with the priority theme, Accelerating the Achievement of Gender Equality and the Empowerment of All Women and Girls by Addressing Poverty and Strengthening Institutions and Financing with a Gender Perspective. And the review theme, Social Protection Systems, Access to Public Services and Sustainable Infrastructure for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women and Girls. And that is from the agreed conclusions of the 63rd session. And please note that UN Women will open the submission process for written statements from the 22nd of October to the 22nd of September to the 13th of October. And we will put a link to this in the chat. NGO CSW forum planning will involve in-person and virtual participation, and we have started subcommittees. We also hope to have a new virtual platform, one that will be easier to use, and more details will be announced as they are confirmed. Now, based on the recommendations from Gender at Work, who we hired in June to do an assessment of NGO-CSW's methodologies, we have hired former NGO-CSW Chair Hootie Gudalekian to serve as consultant to work with subcommittees to produce the forum, and we are delighted. We advertised the position and conducted a comprehensive interview process to find the perfect person to help us. And the applications that came in were strong. We had many wonderful applicants. However, we are confident that the executive committee made the right decision in selecting Hootie to assist us with this process. So at this time, it's time for our poll. And the Advocacy and Research Group, led by Rosa Lazard and Rahel Beagle, has started meeting in order to craft NGO-CSW New York's recommendations for submission to the CSW 60A Bureau. And they've come up with 10 topics that they feel are of utmost relevance to the priority theme and would like your help in identifying the most critical areas. So we would like for you, once the poll is activated, we would like for you to we would like for you to identify your top 5 areas, and then we will take a look and see where it all falls out. Devin, please activate the poll.
Move on to the next thing. I'm having major computer issues.
Okay. All right. Ivy.
Yes, so we have joining with us today, so UN Women, we would like to have some updates about the CSW as much as we can, and so hopefully every month we will have a representative from UN Women joining us to give us updates. And here with us today is Johannes Lang. Hopefully he is here.
Hi, thank you so much, and I hope you can hear me.
Very clear.
Great. Greetings to all colleagues from civil society around the world. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We look forward to working with you for CSW 68 for the upcoming session. And we would like to thank NGO CSW for giving us a chance to update on CSW preparations from UN Women's side and from the Secretariat side. And we'll be happy to join the monthly meetings and to keep you updated as we go forward. Many thanks to Pamela for pointing out already the dates and the priority theme and review theme of the upcoming session, and also for announcing that the first milestone in the CSW cycle will start very soon with the submission of written NGO statements. And that submission will be open from the 22nd of September, this Friday, to the 13th of October. So we'll be looking forward to receiving from civil society the written statements to the upcoming session on the themes related to the session, and instructions on the submission process, including a short video. And also the templates for the written statements are available on the CSW website. And I will post the link into the chat, just a moment, so we can find all the materials. And as you may know, so written statements may be submitted by organizations in consultancy status with ECOSOC in one of the official languages of the United Nations. So either in Arabic, Chinese, English, French, Russian, or Spanish, and then will be published by the UN Secretariat on the UN website in the language received closer to the session. So usually the statements, they need to be processed by the UN Secretariat, and they will go online then usually later by 6 weeks before the session. And then they will also be linked on the CSW website. And as always, we do encourage you to submit joint statements. Maybe just a little bit on the logistics. So every organization in consultative status with ECOSOC may submit an individual statement, one individual statement, but can sign on to as many joint statements as may be useful and helpful. Just also to say that, as you know, there are different categories of ECOSOC status. So for organizations in special consultative status with ECOSOC, it's 1,500 words. That is the word limit for the written statement. And for organizations in general status with ECOSOC, it's 2,000 words. So now, if you have a joint statement, and there's at least one organization that is in general status with ECOSOC, then of course it would be 2,000 words, just to make that clear. But if there are any questions concerning written statements, please do send us an email, and we'll be happy to respond as soon as we can. We usually try to respond within 2 business days, but sometimes we are also a very, very small team, so sometimes we may not be able to do that, but we will respond. And also, please do utilize the templates that are posted on the website, because the statements have to be submitted to the UN Secretariat in a special format. In case you have any issues with the templates, again, please do send us an email and we'll be happy to work with you. And also, we would ask you kindly to only submit one version of the statement. So maybe better to submit at the end of the submission phase, closer to the 13th of October, but have the submission of the final statement, because we'll not be able to keep track of different versions and corrections. So we would ask you to please submit the final version of the statement. So again, any questions, please do not hesitate to send us an email. And for the statement submission, it's statementsubmission@unwomen.org, but we also have the general email address csw@unwomen.org for more general questions. And you will find all these email addresses on the website. Then the next preparatory activity for CSW 68 will be the expert group meeting on the priority theme. And the expert group meeting, that's planned to take place from the 3rd to the 6th of October. And it will be held again in a virtual format. And then the papers that are prepared for the expert group meeting, and also the presentations and papers that come out of the expert group meetings, will be posted on the CSW website. It usually takes a few weeks until they will be posted after the expert group meeting, but we'll be happy to alert you and of course to update you in these meetings as well, as soon as these papers are posted. Concerning CSW registration, like in every year, we're planning to start early in October. We're still waiting for a few Indico adjustments that hopefully will make it a little bit smoother, but we are planning to start early October, and we'll be sending out invitations closer to that point in time. But then usually CSW registration goes from October until the end of January. And we will ask you to, again, look at our web pages that will have the links and guidelines. And of course, we'll update you in our meetings that we will be glad to join. I think that's it for now. I'll stop here. I'll be happy to respond to any questions.
I might need help from Pamela or Devin. I didn't see any questions in the chat, but if there was, I'm looking very quickly. Johannes, did you see some? Oh, where can we see these written statements to sign on? So I think.
Oh, I'll be happy to respond to that. So we only publish the finalized written statements that are part of the CSW documentation. While statements are being written and finalized, it would be up to the organizations to basically connect with their sister organizations to see who would want to sign on for a joint statement. I don't know if Ivy or Pamela, if you want to come in from the civil society side on preparing these statements, but basically that's a joint effort by civil society, and these joint statements with all the signatories will be then submitted to the UN for publishing.
Yes, that's correct. And usually one of the ECOSOC, and I noted what the other comment about roster status, there are 3 different status of ECOSOC. I think most everyone on the call might know that, but there is what's called the roster status, and they cannot submit a statement, written statement.
And maybe I can come in on that. So, I mean, the resolution basically defines the submission of statements by organizations in special consultative status and general consultative status, but it also has a provision on organizations in roster status. And usually we would ask organizations in roster status if they would like to submit a statement as well, but these statements will not be automatically part of the documentation for the session, but they will be sent to the Bureau, because the CSW Bureau is able to invite organizations on the roster to submit statements, and they usually do that. So please, if you're an organization with roster status, either submit to us, and we will then, of course, send it on to the Bureau, or another possibility is you may want to team up with an organization that has general or special status, and then the statement, it will be a joint statement, but it will be accepted, of course, in any case, because these 2 ECOSOC statuses are encouraged to submit statements, and they don't have to be invited specifically. But if you are from a roster organization and want to submit an individual statement, please do. Maybe you can add in the email when you submit that statement that you are in roster consultative status, and then we will make sure that we submit that statement to the Bureau, and usually the Bureau will accept those statements if they are related and make a contribution to the topics of the session, to the priority theme or the review theme.
Thank you, Johannes. Yes, that's the first time I've heard about that, about the roster status, that you would actually, UN Women would help in getting that to the Bureau. But as far as joint statements, yes, I think Beth and others know that we usually do joint statements in order to get that submitted to the official session. And I think that's all that I see, Pamela. Is that right?
Yes,
We have the
that's
full.
there is a question. Is there an example of a written statement, or is it covered in the template?
Yes, so the template basically has just the formatting that's necessary and some placeholder text, but we would encourage you to look at the statements from previous sessions. So all the statements that have been submitted by NGOs for previous sessions, they could serve as great examples for either individual statements or joint statements by organizations. And they're all on the CSW website. So for example, if you go to the CSW website and click on CSW 67, in the documentation, in the documents section, you will not only find the official documents of the session, but also all the NGO statements that have been submitted to that previous session, or you can also go to all the sessions and look at the statements there. And yes, I see in the chat, unfortunately, there is no translation of statements. So statements would need to be submitted in one of the official UN languages. And then they will be published in that language. But unfortunately, the Secretariat does not translate the statements into other languages. But it's really up to the organization to pick which language, which of the 6 UN languages the organization would like to submit the statement in. But just to know, the submission language is also then the same language that will be published.
Thank you so much, Johannes.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was quite a comprehensive update. And we look forward to seeing you at each of our meetings. So thank you. At this time,
Thank you.
You're welcome. At this time, we're delighted to have former NGO CSW New York co-chair chair Sun Young Yoon with us to provide us with an update on CEDAW and the Cities for CEDAW History and Features project.
Great. So happy to be with you on this event. You may remember that for Beijing Plus 20, Susan O'Malley, Dr. Murty, Angeline Martin, Marianne Tarantula, Puri, Ivy, and Betty Levy were all part of the launch of the Cities for CEDAW campaign in the US, which is modeled after the San Francisco adoption of CEDAW in 1998 as a legally binding city ordinance, something that was historic, but which was not paid that much attention to until we decided to launch this campaign. So the new project that we started is called the Cities for CEDAW History and Futures Project. And the point is that we are going to have in the US a new Smithsonian Museum on the women's history. And we need to start collecting this campaign because it started in the US, but it has global significance. What have we found so far? If you look at the timeline, can you imagine when we started the campaign in 2014, a wonderful spike and series of activities all across the United States, showing that there was enthusiasm among mayors and city councils and coalitions to do this campaign. Today, 2023, we have 70 ordinances and resolutions in cities, counties, and states covering more than 82 million people. So our project has also mapped out where these are. Blue is ordinances, yellow is resolutions. We put this on the citiesforcedaw.org website coming up very soon. And we are most happy to welcome Toledo, Ohio. I think we have some members here from that area. But please note how important these ordinances are going to be in the future. We also have collected 35 YouTube and multimedia sources. Gavin Newsom, when he was lieutenant governor, did this video for us. He was mayor of San Francisco in 1998 when this was passed, and he continues to be a champion for CEDAW. He's a human rights lawyer. The second picture you see here is from Pittsburgh. This was a city council hearing, and these hearing YouTubes are wonderful learning experiences for us to see how local authorities and local people are actually interpreting CEDAW. The final picture you see here is Karen Mulhauser, and the wonderful news is with her efforts and the efforts of UNA DC and UNA USA, CEDAW is now legally binding in our state capital in the US. Washington, DC now has a CEDAW ordinance. What we see in our review of the history is a lot of innovative practices coming out of the cities. Cities are really important for our future survival because they contribute 60% of our greenhouse gases. They are the engines of financial innovation. And so when we see things like LA did a mayoral declaration and Mayor Garcetti said, I want all of the heads of city departments to come to my private residence, and I want gender budgeting according to CEDAW principles in my city. We have changes in transport, fire department, police departments on hiring practices for gender equity. We have stronger research that is baseline data on discriminatory practices and what is happening to women, racial minorities, ethnic minorities in our cities. We have a cultural change, which is a cultural change towards women's human rights in the cities, which is affecting us very importantly at the local level on all of our critical issues of violence against women, sexual and reproductive health and rights, and these are going to be even more important in the future. Somehow I can't get the next slide to come. Here we are. So in the future, what do we need? Exactly the example of NGOCSW's YP group. We do need much more engagement by youth groups. CEDAW Youth is a group in Miriam College in the Philippines who worked with us on this campaign. We can definitely bring in more through universities as well. We're getting a lot of requests to train city officials and more outreach to the media. And so Krishanti Demaraj, who was the architect of the first 1998 ordinance in San Francisco, and I will be publishing a new handbook on making rights real for the next generation in the next few months. And we have discovered in our history review that the CSW is a really important place for training, for knowledge building and networking for this campaign. And we hope that the CSW continues to play that very important role because we believe that the United States needs to step in and do its work on climate issues, on women's rights issues, but that we can also learn from other cities that have had the 189 countries that have ratified CEDAW have put it together. Vienna is a wonderful example. Reykjavik is another example. So I just want to come back to the theme of today's meeting and what Pam said at the very beginning, that peace and security at the UN needs our point of view. We really look at the culture of peace in the home, not just as a geographical area. We need to look at security as human security from protection of climate change, as well as from wars, and security for food, housing, and health. And connecting the local to global, I already made this important point. Here are the places where we can go beyond the CSW high-level political forum. Many of us are active at the General Assembly here, but also think about UN Habitat, which is the group that has just started something called Women-Led Cities. And to conclude, I want to invite all of you who are women's rights activists to a really exciting possibility. We have been approved for an informal lunchtime briefing with the CEDAW committee in Geneva during their February session next year at the Palais des Nations in Geneva. You will have to pay your own way and you will have to get your own UN badge, but it will be an exciting time to have an interactive dialogue with the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Sun-Young, for that. You were very, very quick. And we are sharing the slides as you see in the chat. We're going to share all those slides with you. So you have that information and you have a way to contact Sun-Young and the Cities for CEDAW. And we wanted to go back to the poll that we wanted to do earlier. It seems that the technical glitch is now, right, Devin? We're good with the...
Yep, everyone should be able to see the poll. You have to scroll down a little bit to see all the options. So make sure you scroll to the bottom. Yeah. And we'll just wait a minute or two to let everyone answer. Please choose 5 out of these 10 options. And again, you have to scroll down to make sure you see all 10.
Devin, right now it's only giving us a single choice. So we're only able to click on one, just so you know.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Yeah, just put your top one.
And I was going to put that in the chat, but correct.
Yeah, it appears that many people, though, are able to access all 10 because we see the voting. So I don't know why some systems are giving only one and some are giving access to all.
I see what they're saying, Pamela. They can only choose one choice. They can see all 10.
Yeah, only one.
So just choose one.
We can only choose one?
Yes, just choose your top priority.
Okay.
All right, it's slowing down here. I'll give it 10 more seconds. All right.
Ivy, do we vote 5 times? Do you want to bring it up again?
No, everyone's good. Just the top one. You should all see the results now. So 33% chose intersection of women's poverty and climate change. 22% chose education and poverty. 8% chose gender bias in economic policy. And, oh, okay, you should all be able to see it now. 8%. And then the rest are between 3 to 7%.
And migration has 8%.
Yes. All right, back to you, Ivy and Pamela.
Thank you. Thank you, Devin, for that. So I guess now is the time to start our program. And I guess we're doing well on time, which makes me and Pamela very happy. We tried to really plan this, we try to plan it so that we get everything squeezed in. And so I'm sitting in the church center right now, and I'm right across the street from, the General Assembly Hall. I saw the commotion happening earlier today because of, all the high level security and, Biden speaking. He spoke, just about an hour ago, and heads of state are continuing all of their speeches. This is the second day of the SDG summit. I feel like the timing of this conversation on peace is just, I'm surprised that so many of you showed up, actually, because it is a very busy time at the start of this new year at the United Nations. And I was really reflecting on this topic of peace, and even this morning, hearing about, the killings that are happening in, all over the world, of course, but in a place like Armenia too, which I wasn't aware of. And if I didn't have this connection, if I didn't have Houthi in my life, I wouldn't have maybe heard about it. And I noticed that, our news is very limited in what it covers. And if I were to rely on that as my only source of information, how little I would know about the world's tragedies, and how urgent it is for us to be talking about this topic. And I thought, is peace just not a sexy word anymore? Or like, what is it about it that, is it so soft that, the men in charge don't want to, take this seriously? And why is it always, women that seem to be push, peace forward? And just thinking about the roots of patriarchy and it's embedded in violence and war and weapons. And the peace movement was driven by women decades ago. And the critical area of concern of the Beijing Platform for Action addresses as well the women and armed conflict. And it concerns me greatly on a personal level that we don't talk about it anymore, you know, at CSW. And actually, so that was one of the reasons why the working group and was birthed, you know, that it's more urgent than ever. You know, it's an existential crisis. We talk about the climate crisis being our existential crisis. I think having the number of weapons, especially the nuclear weapons, is an existential threat to all of us, our survival, and this planet, actually, the whole planet will go very quickly. And so, so I feel like, you know, we really have to bring this agenda up as something that is to be seriously considered, and we can't talk about it enough. And I think that, you know, it's wonderful that we have Security Council Resolution 1325, but that's not enough. It's obvious that CSW is a very big draw for participation of civil society and NGOs. We get thousands of you here in New York during CSW. Next month, we probably we'll have a very, very small percentage of those numbers here, celebrating the Women, Peace, and Security Agenda. October, you know, at the end of the month is 1325 week. So that said, a lot of you came to this meeting today with awareness of what the topic is going to be about. So I'm sure many of you are experts on this topic, much more than I am. But so I'll jump straight in, and the first part is going to be actually about the policy brief based on our common agenda, and it was a new agenda for peace. I know most of you have read it probably and studied it. There are two women that two speakers I'm going to call forward to talk about this, the gender perspective on this agenda, the new agenda for peace. And the first is by Phoebe Donnelly. She's a senior fellow and head of Women, Peace, and Security at the International Peace Institute. Found it interesting. Her PhD was in international relations at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts. And her dissertation was wedded to warfare, forced marriage, and rebel groups, which received an award. And Eloisa Romani, she's the project coordinator for Scrap Weapons, SOAS, University of London. And she co-authored a Pass Blue article that intrigued me. That article was titled "The Disarmament Agenda is Seriously Stalled. The General Assembly Can Revive It." So I'm going to open the floor for both of them to speak for the next 20 minutes.
Thank you, Ivy and Pamela. Can everyone hear me and see me okay?
I hear you. Yes, and I see you. Hi, Phoebe.
Great. I just put in the chat the article that I wrote, kind of summarizing some of those thoughts I'm going to share with you. But I thought, and thank you for the kind introduction. Also, it's amazing to see the group of people in the chat, and I'm really grateful to be here and to speak with you and hopefully learn from all of you. Hopefully we have a bit of time for discussion, or I'll continue to keep my eye on the chat. As Ivy mentioned, I am at the International Peace Institute, also in the Church Center, Ivy, so we can say hi in person. And I lead our Women, Peace, and Security program there. And so I wanted to start with talking about the process, because for me, trying to follow the new agenda for peace and all of the different components coming out, I think it's helpful to just lay out where we are and what we're talking about. So for those of you who already know this and are familiar, apologies. Please feel free to chime in if any of this seems different from what you interpret. But at the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, there was a General Assembly declaration. And as part of this, there was a request for the Secretary General to submit our common agenda. And within that, there were different areas of action. And one piece of this was the new agenda for peace. So the Secretary General called for this new agenda for peace. And it's building off of the Agenda for Peace from 1992 by Boutros Boutros-Ghali, which really set up this peace architecture in the UN. So DPPA was the lead penholder on the new Agenda for Peace, and it's targeted at member states. So it's not at the operational level. It's really speaking to member states. And it's meant to be the Secretary General's guidance to member states as they negotiate the Pact for the Future. The Pact for the Future is the text that will be agreed upon at the Summit of the Future. And the Summit of the Future will happen this time next year, High Level Week 2024. There's a General Assembly resolution that just started outlining the Pact for the Future. And there were 5 chapters that actually were just decided, I think, a week ago. So those are the focus of the Pact for the Future are going to be sustainable development, international peace and security, science, technology, and innovation, youth and future generations, and transforming global governance. So within that architecture, I want to talk about this new Agenda for Peace policy brief. So again, this is coming from the Secretary General, targeting member states as they prepare to negotiate this Pact for the Future. And so it was released in July 2023, and it was supposed to be short at the strategic level, so not as detailed. And it's, you know, it's about 40 pages, so relatively concise document. And it begins with outlining the principles for an effective collective security system, which the Secretary General identifies as trust, solidarity, and universality. So I'm going to talk about what I pulled from this and some of my analysis from a gender perspective. I'm going to start from kind of more critical thoughts and end on the more positive note. So the document, you all have links to it. There's 12 action areas, and each of those includes accompanying recommendations. So action 5 is where we see kind of the bulk of the gender text. That section is called Transform Gendered Power Dynamics and Peace and Security. And so in my perspective and from other feminist organizations, I think most of us saw these recommendations as not particularly innovative and things that those of us working on these issues have been calling on and thinking about for a while. So the 3 areas the recommendations focus on, or the 3 topics, are women's participation, eradication of gender-based violence, and financing for gender equality. One piece of this text, which I thought was missing, was the lack of discussion around civil society. And in my perspective, there wasn't enough consultation with civil society to feed into this brief. And I'd really love to hear from people in the chat if you were a part of this process at all. I think the line has been coming that civil society was consulted, but in digging deeper, it seems, I think the more grassroots organizations in different locations didn't have a chance to feed into this. The Secretary General also notes that incrementalism has not worked in promoting gender equality, but in my mind, I thought this language and the approach was incrementalist. And so I thought there could have been stronger language around things like zero tolerance of women's exclusion from peace negotiations. And just to give a quick note, going into this, I think the discussion around the new Agenda for Peace was really this sense of bold and innovative ideas. So I think our expectations were high, and then when we look at the recommendations, they're kind of lacking. Also throughout the brief, I saw more of an effectiveness approach tone. So the sense of arguing for women's inclusion, but only because it, you know, what it'll bring to the broader peace and security system, which has its place, I think, but I thought that could be balanced with other types of arguments. So not just relying on this effectiveness idea. Another area of critique came around the discussion in the brief on gender-based violence. And I think this is another area I'm really curious to hear from this group. So the way gender-based violence is discussed kind of in the preambular section, so outside of this action area, is that it's framed as a precursor to political violence. The next sentence talks about how not all violence is linked to peace and security. So in my mind, this set up kind of a view in contrast to how feminists look at gender-based violence as gender-based violence not being separate from political public violence. So I think there's a need to balance that with, we don't want to militarize responses to gender-based violence, but I think more broadly, a progressive gender equality view views gender-based violence as, part of this continuum. There was some attempt to apply an intersectional lens and to mainstream gender, but there's certainly room for improvement. In the section on normative challenge, it was labeled, the brief discusses Indigenous women, older persons, persons with disabilities, women from racial, religious, or ethnic minorities, and LGBTQI plus persons and youth. I think in terms of mainstreaming gender, there's some mention of the impact of the human cost of weapons and how that differs based on one's gender, disability, and age. And that was in Action Area 7. But I still think that it was the other action areas could have brought in gender more. Also, there was language on including men and boys in the fight for gender equality, which I think is a positive step in terms of who's part of this. Moving to what I think people see as the most positive part of this brief is in this section on the normative challenge. There's the statement around we must dismantle the patriarchy and oppressive power structures which stand in the way of progress on gender equality or women's full, equal, and meaningful participation in political and public life. So I think people are really excited to see this term patriarchy in the document. However, this doesn't have an associated recommendation or action area. So to me, I think all of us need to be thinking about what do we do with this language and how can we galvanize member states going into the Pact for the Future to take some of these pieces and positive notes and bring them into negotiating that text. So I will stop here, but I'm really hopeful that I can hear from more of you. Also happy to hear via email or off this call, but it's a pleasure to be here and thank you again for the invitation.
Thank you, Phoebe, for that. And I think I really appreciated you really breaking down what the new agenda for peace was at the beginning, because you were the first one to speak on this. And that in your analysis and leaving us with homework with the patriarchy question. So I'm gonna now pass it on to Eloisa to speak next.
Hello.
There'll be time 30 minutes at the very end for all questions, but that would be for everything. So, okay.
Yes. Hello, everyone. I'm Eloisa Romani. I'm project coordinator of the Scrap Weapons Project and a PhD student at SOAS University of London. I don't know if anyone can see my slides.
Yes, we see them.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. So basically, I'm going to provide a brief introduction about our project. It's called the Strategic Concept for the Removal of Arms and Proliferation. It's based at SOAS University of London, and its main focus is to reframe the debate around general and complete disarmament, which is a different niche from, more generally speaking, nuclear disarmament, which is a big focus on many other disarmament organizations. And general and complete disarmament emphasizes the need to focus not only on the elimination of weapons of mass destruction, but also on the limitation of all types of conventional weapons and the development, confidence, and security building measures. And in particular, in our project, we have developed a draft framework for the Treaty on General and Complete Disarmament, which is a tool to help initiate debates on negotiating general and complete disarmament for states. And we also offer a digital tool, a global weapons tracking portal for organizations to track weapons uses. And it's supposed to be a tool to help transparency mechanism. As Scrap Weapons, we also have sub-projects, including feminist leadership in disarmament and disarmament and interreligious dialogue. And one thing is that we provided, just to answer the question of Phoebe earlier, we actually, as civil society, we sent our input to the new agenda for peace. And so it was actually welcome, as I'm going to explain later. But I agree that it was not much advertised. So we found almost by chance that a civil society, we could provide an input to the new agenda for peace. And our input in particular was about requesting the convening of a UN General Assembly mechanism or special session on disarmament, which is a mechanism which is relatively forgotten at present. The first three...
Lisa, can I
Yes.
interrupt you? Could you make the slide bigger if you
Yeah,
click
sure.
on the top?
Yeah. Oh,
uh,
sorry.
the
Yeah.
maybe the top.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, this
That's
is
it.
it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for mentioning. So I was saying we requested to the as an input the activation of special session on disarmament. It's a mechanism of the General Assembly, and it basically delegates discussion on disarmament mainly to the General Assembly rather than to other supporting organizations such as the Conference on Disarmament and the Disarmament Commission. And the last one and the only ones were held in 78, 82, and 88, but a fourth never occurred, despite there having been many working groups to this end with objectives and agenda already agreed. So regarding the new agenda for peace, it was earlier illustrated what is the mechanism. Basically, member states requested the UN Secretary General to provide recommendation to reinvigorate the system global governance based on multilateralism. So there was this call for the new agenda for peace policy brief in 2021, and it was released in last July, and it actually includes contribution from UN member states, civil society, and also from the high-level advisory board on effective multilateralism. And the next step will be the convening of Summit of the Future in 2024. So the view of scrap weapons is that the new agenda for peace is a forward-thinking document which envisions like ways for a revitalized UN and calls for the implementation of processes that are more suited to our times. And as salient points, we note the introduction of new language on transforming institutional structure, value systems, and gender norms. Although I agree it's not really comprehensive and fully satisfying. But what we noted as positive was a call for reform of the disarmament machinery, including, as I mentioned before, the Conference on Disarmament and the Disarmament Commission organism. And just to provide an overview, by disarmament machinery, we refer to all the multilateral processes, procedures, and practices, and international bodies whose purposes are to deal with issues of disarmament, non-proliferation, and arms control. What we noted as positive in the new agenda for peace in particular is that the Secretary General actually incorporated what as scrap weapons we requested for inclusion, the activation of UN Special Session on Disarmament of the General Assembly as a preferred forum to conduct disarmament discussion. In particular, I quote some lines saying the General Assembly should exercise its primary role for substantive deliberations in the field of disarmament, and it should he recommended establishing an intergovernmental process to discuss and consider the role, timing, and preparation of a special session of the General Assembly on disarmament. Why we think that a special session on disarmament is important? We believe that as a forum of the General Assembly, it would significantly facilitate furthering discussion about issues that have often been sidelined, such as issues of gender equality, inclusion of voices of women, and then marginalized communities. And we think, again, it would be a critical forum to consider also reforms of the wider disarmament machinery, which has not been upgraded since the Cold War to incorporate contemporary concerns across cyber, artificial intelligence, and outer space, the long-term and immediate effects of nuclear as well as conventional arms, particularly small arms and light weapons, on women and girls, indigenous groups, and vulnerable communities, particularly in the Global South. And also, we believe that a special session on disarmament would overcome the barriers of the Conference on Disarmament, which again is the UN body tasked with negotiating treaties on weapons control. the Conference on Disarmament lacks adequate state representation because it counts only 65 member states, and its operation has stalled for almost 30 years because of the requirement of consensus to conclude treaties. And consensus is a de facto veto power, we could say. And we believe SSOD would be able to leverage on the authority of the General Assembly to create new mandates on comprehensive disarmament. Now, consideration of gender aspects of the new agenda for peace. I quote here, I include some relevant languages that I think is most relevant, speaking about dismantling patriarchal power structures. And in particular, there are recommendations in Action 5, transforming gender power dynamics in peace and security, which recommends introducing concrete measures to secure women's full, equal, meaningful participation at all levels of decision-making on peace and security, including by supporting quotas at different levels of governments. Then the recommendation of committing to eradicating all forms of gender-based violence and enacting robust legislation, and providing financing for gender equality, particularly mentioned 50% of official development assistance to gender equality and a minimum of 1% of development assistance and direct assistance to women organizations. So a bit of a critique, noting, let's say, the positive language on kind of to what has been in the past, references to gender norms. We think that overall the new agenda for peace fails to identify the relationship between peace, disarmament, and advancing the status of women and girls and marginalized communities. And in particular, the question of why arms proliferation mostly affects women and girls, as well as historically marginalized communities, has often been ignored in debates about peace building. So it has also been ignored in the new agenda for peace. But adopting disarmament measure is crucial to challenge the patriarchal culture of weapons possessions, because conflicts are a highly gender activity, from the use of sexual violence as a weapon of war to enduring any economic burdens. Women are always disproportionately affected by conflicts, and the possession of guns in particular contributes to weaken the ability of women to negotiate their existence in patriarchal spaces. I would like to provide just an overview of the wider theoretical concept behind this statement, which is feminist international theory. In particular, it posits that international relations, well, it's actually an observation, the arms industry is associated with masculinity, international status, and power projection. And usually in debates, it has been noticed by several researchers, countries not possessing nuclear weapons are referred to as feminine. And a breakthrough in this argument was made by the famous researcher Carol Cohn in her famous work, Sex and Death in the National World of Defense Intellectual. She noted how the language used by strategic analysts to describe nuclear weapons is often imbued with sexual connotations and imaginary, alluding to a missile envy. And so feminist approaches to disarmament challenge the normalization of rationality of international relations theory of nuclear deterrence, which privileges the national interest and investment into the military-industrial complex, which opens up the space for to possible conflict. And feminist international relations theory is more proactive towards disarmament issues, prioritizes conflict prevention, peace building, and international cooperation. And so this means that women's participation in decision-making circles at all levels is functional also towards establishing a different mindset in the conduct of international relations. So if we want to draw conclusion from a gender perspective on the new agenda for peace, let's say the view of scrap weapons is that the way forward is to move towards general complete and disarmament agenda. And because it accounts for the importance of conventional weapons like guns, small arms, and light weapons, which is what mostly affects women and girls and marginalized communities. And we know that the new agenda for peace, although it recommends strengthening a nuclear non-proliferation regime, it still does not enough and it should pursue an agenda on general and complete disarmament. So it shouldn't just speak about non-proliferation, it should speak about disarmament, which is a stronger direction. So why is general and complete disarmament important? Because it better addresses the causes of conflict, which is can be identified into the availability of weapons, international arms trade, and the investment of states in the global north in weapons industries, to the detriment of societies, mostly in the global south, which suffer from conflicts as consequences of illicit trafficking of conventional arms. So it's important to say also that global general and complete disarmament, although it is identified as one of the ultimate objectives of the international community as per the provision of Article 6 of the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, and also in the final document of the first UN Special Session on Disarmament, it is actually now mostly advanced by non-nuclear power states and by the non-aligned movement, and is not in the mainstream debate of the global north and nuclear states. And also, so we think, yes.
So we have to wrap up this part.
Yes, I just came to the conclusion. Yes,
okay.
So basically we just believe that general and complete disarmament could be advanced by the forum of the special session on disarmament. And so the inclusion of this in the new agenda for peace gives light to move this agenda forward, which is something which didn't happen in the last 30 years. So we conclude with this positive approach. And yeah, that completes my analysis. Thank you very much.
Everyone's asking about your presentation, so please, we will share it.
Yes,
I think it's okay.
Yeah, I can send it and would be most happy to do so.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I know there's so much to you all deserve your own like 90-minute meeting. So I'm really sorry to keep it so brief. It's really just a taste, I know. And so the second the panel that we wanted to do is to reflect on the SDG summit that's happening, like I said, the second day today, in relation to peace for gender equality. And we're going to have actually 3 speakers for that. And Sylvie Jacqueline Domo, I know I'm saying it wrong, who is the president of WYPS, which is the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, based in Cameroon. She will speak. I found it so, she received the honorary title of Queen of Peace in the Nelandem community of southwestern Cameroon. That is so beautiful to be the Queen of Peace. And then we'll also have Marina and Mathilde. I will introduce them after Sylvia speaks. Sylvie, it's Sylvie. This is another person that we're spotlighting right now. This is not. It's Sylvie.
Sylvie Jacqueline. I
Thank you for being with us.
Hear me.
We can hear you. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, permit me to first send greetings from Cameroon and from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom to each and everyone connected to this meeting. It's my pleasure to be associated to this very important discussion and to provide also some remark. I want to say that thank you so much, the NGO CSW, for bringing the peace agenda into this discussion, for bringing the peace agenda into all the discussion on the table, because that's exactly the right thing to do in this world, which is growing militarization, growing insecurity, and so on. I want to share some remarks as regard to the SDG Summit and in relation to peace and for gender equality. I would like to start by saying that when the world decided to take collective responsibilities of achieving the SDGs, we all knew that this will be challenging, but we are so surprised and shocked to see that the challenges continue to be exacerbated by the growing militarization, the conflict and inequality in many parts of the world. To achieve sustainable development, we need peace. And to realize peace, we need sustainable development. There's no one without the others. They are interconnected. So to achieve gender equality, which is one of the key pillars of the SDGs, we seriously need peace. We seriously need the most is peace, because without peace, nothing else can happen. And we can't have peace without women leading. How? It's not possible. Women constitute the majority of the world population, a very big demographic dividend. And therefore, we can't have peace without women being present at the table. We need women to be secured and empowered to be sure that the peace is sustained. If you want to have sustainable peace, we must have women at the table. I also want to indicate that we have come a long way, but sadly, we will not be on track to achieve gender equality by 2030. We all know that when we look at the current trends in the world, with all the crises, the war going on, we are afraid that this might not happen as we really hope. At the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, which is the world's longest standing women's peace organization, we have been advocating for peace for over 180 years old. And for decades, we have understood that feminist peace will help us to end the root cause of conflict and achieve lasting peace. And the lasting peace is a must if we want to achieve the SDGs. I want to say that feminist peace has extraordinary manifestations. Not only does it address the root cause, address the conflict, it also helps to challenge and transform the political economies of war to feminist political economies of peace and gender justice. And at WILF, we have a formula that will have deep impact on the long term. The first thing that we have thought of is we work on advocating a feminist political economy through making linkages between the larger economic theories and the manifestation on the life of women. So the linkages are extremely important. We also work on countering, working and developing their skills on feminist peace. We need these men to work on feminist peace in order to question the militarization, in order to question the arm race, in order to question the patriarchal system and deepen gender roles and further conflict and violence. We support women's human rights defenders to develop their voice and access international advocacy platform. We also work to ensure that women are present at negotiation table and are leading peace initiatives and processes, because their ability to bring peace is extremely important. Moreover, through our program, Reaching Critical, which is our disarmament program, we advocate for disarmament and the production of feminist knowledge on the military industrial system. Now, moving towards the SDGs, as we move towards the SDG, we have to constantly remind ourselves of the demographic distribution of women as a population. We can't afford to leave more than half of the population in total poverty, and in total destitute if the women don't rise. If the women are not at the table, I want to tell you honestly that the world will continue to fall behind. Women are a big demographic dividend that must be valued and making good use of. Women's poverty and disempowerment have direct linkages with poor governance, chronic conflict situation, low life expectation, and many more critical factors that are linked to human development. As we continue to interrogate this as a framework for our development and the development of our communities, we should continue to do feminist analysis to understand why we are failing to deliver and what needs to be done. This is very, very critical. The constant questioning, the root analysis is very important to really know what are the front line. Development is a global problem with ramification on all levels. Without global leaders and without challenging the power dynamic across the world and in our communities, we will fail to use the SDGs as a mechanism for a feminist and long-lasting peace. I am truly very concerned about the global backlash on human rights and especially the rights of women. If we examine the current trends, we will see the entire SDG process is in many parts of the world. I want to take the case of my country, Cameroon. In some part of Cameroon, and also in some part of like Afghanistan, girls are not going to school because of the armed groups and because of the war, the ongoing war that have upended life and taken away their futures. How can we allow girls to not receive education they deserve? The education that will protect them and their children. There is already a problem there. We are failing these children, we are failing these girls, and we are failing millions of girls and women around the world who lag behind on many fronts. So the SDGs, I want to conclude by this, to say that the SDGs are a collective effort, and we can't cross this milestone without women of Afghanistan, without women of Cameroon, and without women from many, many parts of the world. They will not be back to school without feminist peace, a peace that guards their rights, that take their needs into consideration and give them a voice in their future. I want to conclude by saying that our voices must be heard if you want really to dream, to hope that by 2030, we might have an idea, a positive ideas of where we are with the SDGs. This year, we are celebrating the upcoming International Day of Peace. It's just in 2 days' time. Let us remember that we are being called to make actions and not just speak words. Our actions for peace are valuable and they are needed as we are striving to make progress with the SDGs. We have peace in our hand, and the peace that we have in our hand is need to be spread all over the world. And if we do that, if everybody, each and everyone consider that the peace that he or she wants to see happen is in his or in her hand, this is already a step towards achieving the SDG. So let's all stand up to ask for actions and not only words. But I want to say that no action is small. Any action, no matter how small it is truly valuable when we are. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Sylvie, for your passionate words. And yes, International Day of Peace is in 2 days, and you said that there is a campaign that WYPS is part of, and we'll try to put that in the link so that everyone's aware. I think there might be a link to that, the actions that we can take for peace. And
yes, maybe after the meeting, we can also share information about the 1 week long campaign. It's called Women's Peace Week. It's a week to, it's a whole week to take actions for peace.
Okay.
And as I said, no action is small, it's valuable. So the actions for peace can range from any kind of kindness, any act of kindness, to endeavors and so on and so forth. Anyway, after the meeting, we are going to share some information about it, and all over the women all over the world should start for peace. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much again. We'll make sure to join that campaign. And so I'm going to call on Marina Kumskova and Matilde Depifi. I'm so sorry, I'm butchering your name. Depri. And so they are going to speak about, so Marina is the Senior UN Policy and Advocacy Advisor of the Global Partnership for the Prevention of Armed Conflict. And she'll be joined by Matilde, and they're going to be talking about the climate brief that just launched, I believe, yesterday. So I don't know.
Thanks, Ivy.
Yeah.
It's always hard to come after Sylvie, who has been my boss in the previous life, Sylvie, right? When I was still involved. So I'm trying to push the feminist lens into less, I guess, gender-focused organizations. So GPAC is a global partnership for the prevention of armed conflict. We are the global network of local peace builders. Not every member of our organization is a feminist, but many of us are. Right, so we as GPAC are working on intersection between development and peace building, and a big focus of our work is, of course, looking and following the SDG developments, primarily as it's focused around climate. The reason why GPAC is committed to the climate question is primarily because of our feminist members, feminist leaders, really from the Pacific, including Sharon Bhagwan-Rolls, who many of you, of course, know, who has been advocating for a long time with GPAC to basically ensure that the question of climate is primarily at the forefront, both development actors as well as peace and security actors, because, of course, for the Pacific, as their experience climate change, it becomes an issue of both development and peace building and sustaining peace. One lesson learned that we have been able to learn from the Pacific leaders, Pacific women's leaders, is the importance of intersectional approach. Because here sitting at the UN, we all care about either peace building language or development language or human rights language, but we rarely ever look at all of these problems in a comprehensive package, which in the Pacific, that has been called, well, really championed as the definition of triple nexus. And triple nexus, and that in that sense, has to be gender sensitive and inclusive throughout all of the different processes. And the reason why is because, and many of you on this call, I'm pretty sure, are able to reflect on it as well. For the local actors, it's not necessarily that a particular problem is a development problem, kind of within the SDG framing, or a peace and security problem. It is just a problem, right? That requires all of the actors to be able to come together and solve these issues in a comprehensive manner. And this is kind of the intersection where our Pacific partners have been working on with the recent launch of the Pacific Women's Mediators Network. Sorry, with the launch of the Pacific Women's Mediators Network, the idea behind that particular network is to be able to not necessarily for women to only engage in the peace building space or development space, but rather create the type of platform of feminist movement that would be able to engage in the conversation with development, peace building, and human rights partners, kind of serving as that middle ground where the knowledge still stands and can transfer between development, peace, insecurity, and human rights space. And of course, in that approach, we do use a gender transformative principles, and gender transformative principles for us will be both women's participation, meaning ensuring that there is a full, meaningful, and equal participation of women, but also the fact that gender considerations have to be taken into account, gender analysis. And from early research of GPAC, what we've learned is that, for example, in Zimbabwe, because of the lack of access to natural resources.
Oh, Marina, you're muted.
Oh, someone muted me, I guess. So what we've learned in Zimbabwe is that, sorry if I am repeating myself. So what we are learning in Zimbabwe is that women, because of certain development challenges, climate change, competition for natural resources, women have to go into mining, right? Which means that the protection of people in the context of mining have to take into consideration specific gender considerations. But because they're never there, and without women's feminist movement, they would never be there, the work of kind of feminist connectors across the triple nexus will be particularly important to bring the principles that we are all here discussing and agreeing on into spaces where people do not necessarily agree with us. Right? It is important to actually make sure that the knowledge that we gather and collect here actually goes out in different spaces. So this is what I refer to as our recent mapping brief that we have developed specifically with an idea to bring some of those feminist principles into the climate debate across the UN system that Tilly is going to tell you more about.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So we've recently launched a brief on that talks about the relationship between climate change, peace, and security from a perspective of human security, which implies the analysis of diverse risks, including economics, health, environmental, personal, community, and political risks. We basically outline the debates of whether climate change has a place to take in the UN security and peace building agenda, in which we found three perspectives, one being that some member states encourage considering climate change as a peace and security issue. The second one being that some member states totally oppose this consideration. And finally, some member states believe the Security Council's engagement in addressing climate induced risk should be nuanced and basically depends on contexts. So the UN Security Council is less likely to refer to climate change, peace, and security in thematic resolutions and presidential statements, but we found some exceptions regarding women, peace and security and climate, and youth, peace and security and climate. And so member state of the Peace Building Committee and ECOSOC have emphasized that local communities and civil society, particularly women and youth, could be engaged in efforts to address climate change, sustainable development, and peace building and sustaining peace. And so what we talk about in this brief is that within the development space, there is a solid recognition for youth, women, disabled people, and refugees in climate actions. So basically our brief is an outline so that member states remember that these commitments exist and so that they can build on them. And on that note, I'll bring it back to Marina.
Yeah, just drop it in the chat our brief as well as some of the resources that may be useful for you. I think it's worth recognizing that yesterday member states adopted a political declaration to accelerate SDGs, and a part of it is essentially the climate element, right? Our brief essentially brings together all of the agreed language. For many of you, that brief may be very intimidating because it has a lot of kind of technical policy language, but I think the benefit of all of you knowing that that language exists is that we then can go back and hold governments accountable for the commitments they have already made. As Tilly mentioned, the commitments to local civil society, the commitment to local indicators, local analysis, early warning mechanisms, commitment to women's equal participation in climate action, commitment to youth equal participation in climate action. So all of these commitments have been already made, right? So when it comes to accelerating action, knowing that that language exists is quite important. And therefore, that brief hopefully would be able to give you some of that advocacy messages that you can use moving forward, that essentially and first and foremost builds on the recognition of the work done by women peace builders at the country level. right? And I just want to make a small disclaimer that we do not mean to speak for the women in the Pacific. It is just the time difference, of course, always works against us. So big regards to everyone from Sharon Bhagwan roles, and thank you, and happy to answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marina, for that, and Matilda too, on the brief and all the work that you're doing to collect that, like the brief and all that you're publishing. It is very helpful for our advocacy, our joint advocacy efforts. You make our lives much easier by doing that research for us. So thank you again. And yes, Sharon would have loved to be here, but I think it's 2 or 3 a.m. In the morning, so she is asleep. So to get to the last portion, and we're running a little bit late, so the Q&A will be shortened. So start thinking about the questions, anything you want to address, put it in the chat so that maybe the speakers can look at the chat, and you can, we'll give you a minute or 2 at the end to say some words based on that. But the last is actually a recap of the Peace for Gender Equality, Bridging Generation Equality, Women, Youth, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action, and the Commission on the Status of Women. This was a side event that we did this is NGO CSW New York during Women Deliver in Rwanda, which was held in July. And NGO CSW New York, we participated in Women Deliver through a UN Foundation grant in order to amplify the Generation Equality campaign. And that was why we were there, and the funds were from the grant itself. And there was a launch of the new working group, which Rahel and I are the co-chairs of. And I will introduce Rahel, who is, in addition to her treasurer responsibilities for the committee, she's actually the UN representative for Women's Refugee Commission. So she lives and breathes women, peace, and security. And then we'll also have Karen Dasa, who is also here from Cameroon. She's physically in New York at the time being, but like Sylvie is from the same country. And Karen was a speaker at that side event. So I'm going to have them give a little recap, a brief one, and waiting for them to be spotlighted. And it's all yours, Rahel.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ivy. I will keep this as brief as I can because I know that a lot of you have questions, and I am so humbled to be in everyone's company here. I wanted to just try to tie together what we heard this morning about the new agenda for peace, about nuclear and weapons non-proliferation, about dismantling this industrial military complex and patriarchal structures that perpetuate violence against women and conflict-related sexual violence, and of course, linking that to climate change as well. We heard from the president of Colombia today in his speech to the General Assembly that there can be no actualization of the Sustainable Development Goals until the wars are all put to an end. I think that I could speak for my colleagues in saying that this is the exact thought that we have at the forefront of our mind in working to link together the WPS framework with the CEDAW framework and with the Commission on the Status of Women. Often, as we know, in our advocacy, in our influencing that we do at all levels of government and multilateral decision-making, we have women's rights and gender over here. We have arms trade treaty and monitoring over here, and the links are not made. Every year in the CSW, as we convene around each priority theme, there is not a very high profile for humanitarian action and not a very high profile of the crises that women, girls, LGBTIQ folks, and other historically oppressed populations are facing in crises and conflicts that are becoming longer and more complex and more difficult to address. So to that, to address all of this and to address this disconnect, we in the NGO-CSW decided that we would like to organize a working group on peace for gender equality. And this is our attempt at integrating the women, peace, and security agenda along with the youth, peace, and security agenda into the formal processes and the dialogues at the Commission on the Status of Women in order to advance this common objective. So in Kigali, we had the privilege of attending the Women Deliver conference held this past July. I know many of you were also there. And we had a special session, as Ivy mentioned, thanks to our partnership with the UN Foundation. This was really an interactive dialogue. It wasn't a formal panel discussion. And I'll let Karen Dasa, who was one of the speakers at the event, talk more about the content of the discussion, but it held three primary objectives. The first was to identify areas where the CSW and the Women, Peace, and Security and Humanitarian Action are mutually reinforcing and where they can leverage their separate strengths to, again, advance this common advocacy agenda. Second, we wanted to develop a strategy and a roadmap that would support civil society engagement, meaningful engagement in advocating for humanitarian action within the CSW and within advocacy and influencing around, small arms and light weapons control, around non-proliferation, around strengthening the architecture with the arms trade treaty and tracing mechanisms, that we have a gender lens and a gender focus. So the third objective was to solicit and inspire greater support, awareness, and partnerships for advancing these strategies and this roadmap. So we brought together practitioners from across several regions, including Syria, Cameroon, Burundi, and Liberia, and also Bangladesh, to talk about their experience with the civil society organizations that they lead and work with in implementing WPS. So what does it actually mean when we're talking about women-led organizations who are on the front lines of conflict and crisis? What are the challenges that they face in their day-to-day, and how can we support and strengthen civil society advocacy in multilateral decision-making so that it is actually meaningful to the folks who are worst affected on the ground? So with that, I would like to turn it over now to Karen Dasa, who was one of our panelists and one of our discussants in that session, to share a recap of what she talked about based on her experience as a leader and as an expert. And Karen, if you're able to unmute yourself, I'll turn it over to you.
Actually, Rahel, we're not sure if she's actually with us. We didn't see her in the participant list. So, okay. we may actually be able to open the mics unless you have other things to say about the event.
The only thing that I would like to share about the event is that we also had representatives there from different advocacy coalitions and different multi-sectoral funding pools and mechanisms that support women-led civil society organizations who are responding to conflict and crisis. So in that the session, we had representatives from the Feminist Humanitarian Network, which I know many of you are members of and may also be familiar with. We also had representatives from the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, which is a pooled funding mechanism led by UN Women and the UN Foundation as the fiduciary agent to get funding, a pool of funds from the private sector, from UN member states, and channel those funds directly through flexible, unrestricted grants to women-led organizations who are acutely affected by conflict and crisis. So we had all of these different interests and people who are working in all of these different aspects come together to one table. And it was very powerful to lay everything out and see, okay, so we have, you know, this very high level of research and advocacy that's happening in the Security Council, in the GA, and then we have grassroots activists, and to bring them together and lay out clearly how these pieces can join forces and be more effective, I think helped us to lay out a blueprint going forward. And this blueprint is, for now, focused specifically on how we're going to advance women and youth peace and security and humanitarian action considerations within CSW 68, and working to develop advocacy messages, talking points for member states, interventions, and so forth, that really make crystal clear how war impacts poverty. And I know that this sounds like a no-brainer and a very obvious thing, but as advocates and as strategists and influencers, it's very important for us to marshal evidence and really lay things out very clearly so that we have unified, strong messages that are going out to member states in the right spaces at the right time.
Ivy, I'm sorry,
Yes,
Ivy and
Karen
Rahel.
has joined, yes, in the meeting. So we can spotlight Karen as well to see if she has anything to add. Rahel, you.
Wonderful. So she is here. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Rahel. Hi, everyone. And going back to our side events while in Kigali, I think what resonates is the urgency for us to champion the women peace and security agenda and youth peace and security agenda respectively, and looking at the intersection of these the different resolutions when it comes to building peace all around the world. And also to note that when we talk about women's rights, the heightened level or the highest place where women's rights are being women are being abused is mostly during conflict, where women are very vulnerable, and those who have guns are able to just infringe on the rights of women and girls. And I think that this is something we need to prioritize and also incorporate in our different work.
Thank you, Karen. I wasn't sure if you were finished or you just muted by accident.
It sounds like she got cut off, actually.
Oh, okay. Well, we can open for the mic for question and answers and invite all the speakers back. Hopefully everyone is still with us, since we have about 20 minutes left. So it gives a little chance. And I do see a hand. There was a question that came up like earlier on during the program that I wanted to address, and that was that how will this, this whole topic that we're discussing at this monthly meeting, how is that linked to the CSW priority theme, specifically on how will strengthening financial institutions be incorporated in this particular topic? And so I thought that was an interesting question. But I would also like to call on Nellie. Is that Nellie?
You got it right. Yes, it's
okay.
Nellie. Hi, everybody. I joined a little bit late, but and I feel like I'm always saying this in different spaces that I'm in, or asking about this in different spaces that I'm in at the UN. especially when it comes to women and girls, peace, climate justice, gender, climate justice issues. I think one of the things that I don't hear enough of is the fact that there's a lot of trauma that needs to be addressed in working towards peace, in addressing nonviolence, in anything that has to do with justice. There's always issues of trauma that even when we start to achieve peace, even when we start to achieve greater justice, we have to make sure that people are well and that they're thriving. And so my organization, this is we work on the intersection of human and planet resiliency. But I wonder if any of the speakers could, and there's no judgment here if that component was absent, but is that something that has come up, and how have you tried to or incorporated that in the work or in the conversations that you've had?
Nellie, was that just a general question for everyone or directed at anyone specific?
Well, I picked up when just to the tail end of the speaker before Sylvie. I feel like Sylvie kind of touched on it, maybe without talking about trauma, but talking about how the issues are connected. But any of the speakers that feels like they have something to share about this would be helpful.
I just want to mention, I'd like to respond quickly if I may, and thank you very much for raising this issue. As you know, in the advocacy work that we do around conflict-related sexual violence and GBV, everything that we do emphasizes the need for survivor-centered and survivor-led approaches. And we also work very hard to ensure that language that lifts up survivors and explicitly states survivor-centered, survivor-led approaches are incorporated into UN documents, into negotiated documents, and into resolutions, but not into the UN Security Council, because we absolutely don't want any new products that would disrupt the normative framework. But in the dialogues, this is something we're emphasizing. Addressing this broad category of trauma is something that is core to feminist values and, as you know, core to feminist movements, and is something that we in the NGO CSW prioritize and value very, very, very strongly. So one example of how we are addressing this is preparing for the next CSW. As you know, as Ivy discussed, we have a social justice committee and we have other planning going into the forum. And we decided that we want to let the social justice committee and other aspects of planning the forum come up with events, with solutions for people to discuss, to share resources, to share knowledge, and at a very grassroots level, to support each other in healing and to promote healing and recognize that for activists and advocates, healing is part of resistance. So this coming CSW, we will be having a space that is dedicated for healing and wellness, where we will have trauma-informed resources for CSW delegates. So that's one concrete way that we're addressing it. I am very interested in hearing from others about their thoughts on the topic.
Yes, if I may say something, I want to say that the care aspect is extremely important. As women work, especially in this challenging environment, in the world full of war and conflict, there is one component that needs to be more and more incorporated into the work that women do, and it's linked with the peace that we want to see. This is she just mentioned is the care, the self-care, the community care, the collective care. It is extremely important because it's about the productivity, it's about the potential. I remember Urgent Action Fund Africa has a book titled, "What is the point of a revolution if you can't dance?" So it's important that women, as they are doing this work in the community, should look at this very important aspect in order to have more greater impact. Maybe just to give one example to make us understand the need to stress on this self-care, on this community care, on this collective care, to make sure that we care not only for ourselves as individuals, but we care with one another, because it's one of the best potential to succeed for good productivity. We had a mission at the level of African Union. We were going to the community to listen to the women who conducted some projects with the funding of the African Union. And the projects were tasked or given to the different countries by the Women and Gender Development Directorate. When we spoke to these women in Nigeria, and other countries, we were trying to see what is the outcome of the project that they have conducted in their communities, especially the key results. So the women were mentioning what is the importance, what have we gained as the result of this project? We have been able to send our children to school. We have been able to bring more food to people in the community. We have been able, no woman talk about something concerning herself. So everything was about the children, the family, the community, and so on. So, and you could see that these women were in great need, even of psychological support. So to say that something extremely important that we should incorporate into our work, the self-care, the collective care, the community care, because our results depend on the way we take care of one another and we take care of ourselves as we do this job. Because unfortunately, the environment is more and more challenging, and we cannot get to support the people in the community if we end up being burned out. Thank you.
Looks like Marina and Matilda have their hand up.
Oh, okay, good.
All right, thank you. Just maybe to, you know, I'm known as a mood breaker in this situation. I think we have to reflect properly on what care means and to what extent donors care about our care, right? Because I think one part that we did learn hard way, you know, as an example in the conflict of Ukraine or Nagorno-Karabakh recently, that that's where mostly the need for mental health and psychosocial support came quite strongly, where people just really wanted to kind of leave the war zone and be able to kind of re-strategize, because peace builders cannot certainly function if they have to live through trauma. And bringing people together anywhere outside of the conflict, it's a quite expensive exercise. Within the lack of flexibility from the donors, we cannot really afford doing that, to kind of just reallocate resources, but also donors generally do not want to fund convenings, right? It's very few donors who are willing to do so. So I think one action that we can all make is really kind of clarify that, yes, maybe that meeting somewhere won't necessarily bring concrete peace building outcomes, right? It won't necessarily create a cleaner water or better dialogue or a better policy outcome, but it does certainly create a big component of what drives the whole peace building architecture, right? So in that sense, I think one action that we can consider doing together is actually develop some advocacy with the donor community to really fund the care in order for us to be able to, well, not for us, but for local peace builders to be able to continue the work.
Marina, it's interesting you say this because I was actually stranded. It took me 3 days to get to Rwanda because of delays, and I couldn't get on the plane, and anyway, it was a big drama trying to get there. And I happened to be stuck at the airport with like a bunch of donors going to Women Deliver. And one of them was trying to educate me on this concept of care justice or something, and that this was a direction that they wanted to go into. more, you know, and to start like developing, you know, funds around this. And I mean, I don't know about it, but I just found it very interesting that they were mentioning this from a, you know, donor perspective, that they see the need. So yeah, I definitely see the acknowledgement there. Is there anything that Phoebe, Eloisa, you would like to mention before we close the meeting? Any
Yes.
during the discussions that may have, yeah.
Yeah, I would like, to thank the person who raised the issue of dealing with trauma. I think in any type of field relating with women emancipation, including disarmament, should be taken into account. And I would myself endeavor to consider about this issue. I would like to echo a comment by, I think it was Ellen Woodsworth, who put a comment which about something like basically there is a campaign done by activists, particularly women from Afghanistan and Iran, to have the notion of gender apartheid inserted as a crime under international law. I think this is one of the most important issues for women's rights ever. And I think there should be much more mentions about this in public debates and in the media, because I think it's just something that cannot be accepted at present times. And so I think I would like to encourage anyone through their networks to try to support this movement, because I think it is really crucial to consider gender apartheid as a crime, actually. And it's one of the things that User Price is not considered a crime already. So I think there should be much more public debate about this. So I just wanted to echo this comment, and thanks for pointing out to Ellen. Yeah. So.
Yes, Phoebe, did you want to share anything?
No, I don't have anything to add. I've learned a lot from everyone. So I put my email in the chat and happy to chat further with anyone. It's nice to make the connections. I also just wanted to share that as we think about the intersection of women, peace, and security and different forums at the UN, IPI is having an event tomorrow that everyone can tune into virtually, thinking about, it's a high-level event on how to innovate in terms of advancing the women, peace, and security agenda. So I just put the registration for the webinar in the chat, just another way to kind of engage and continue this discussion. So thank you.
I appreciate that. And Eloisa, actually, there is a rally happening actually as we speak. It conflicted at the same time as this meeting at the Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza right now on the situation in Iran. And yes, this mention of the gender apartheid, actually. And if Sylvie or anybody has any final words before we close off, please do share anything.
My final word is just to thank you so much. Thank everyone for coming and for having this very important discussion. Peace is the key. Yeah, peace is the key. There is no possible sustainable development without peace, and no peace without sustainable development. So we need as women to rise up and make our spaces. Let's make our spaces, because we are majority of the population, and because we all know that each time women take the lead and involve in anything, it is really sustainable. So let's rise up and try to push for the peace agenda everywhere we are. So to close, I want to say that let's all join this Women's Call for Peace campaign and make our voice heard, especially regarding the peace agenda, to make sure that the SDGs are really influenced by our voices. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. I guess Rahel, you didn't have anything, right? we're all good. Pamela, wasn't sure if you had anything to add. I want to thank all of the speakers for all your contributions to this discussion. Thank you so much for being with us and for being a part of the NGO CSW community for today. And hopefully you'll join future meetings with us too. And we will continue to keep this bridge alive throughout the year. Not just today, not just in October. And so we will be in touch. The working group will be in touch. So if everybody wants to open their mics and say goodbye, that's our tradition here, started by Hootie. So if everyone wants to say goodbye, have a great
Bye.
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 Bye.